Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Fiends podcast, where we discuss everything fantastical with your hosts, myself, Stevie Collier, aka the Gnome, because I am only 5'8", as compared to Andy Peliquin, the Giant, who is 8'9".
I think you're gonna keep making me bigger and bigger. With
You're gonna get bigger and bigger. And we are with our guest author, Phil Tucker, who is author of The Chronicles of the Black Gate. And he has many books out with fantastic and awesome looking book covers. Say hello to Phil Tucker.
Hey everybody, I am Phil Tucker, an epic fantasy author, as said, most recently of The Chronicles of the Black Gate, but I have written quite a few books, and I'm not going to list them all because if you want to take a look, jump on my author page.
Yeah, I'm looking at them. There's so many.
How many have you written, Philip?
I don't know.
Oh yeah, that many.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at them like my finger's getting tired.
And I also have some pen names where I have a bunch more stuff published under there. So at this point, full-length novels is something like 15, maybe 20. And then I've got a bunch of serials and novellas. And
do the pen names work for you pretty well? Because then you don't have your author platform.
Well, I was doing something very different. I was writing paranormal romance. This was back when I was really trying to break in and go from sort of obscurity to making some money. And it kicked my butt. Paranormal romance was really hard to write. I was really arrogant, and I sort of thought I could just wade in there and channel my my sort of like Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse knowledge, and just sort of add some romance in there and make it all work. And it didn't. So I had to work really hard at that for about a couple of years, and I finally got there, and it started to do really well. But I ended up realizing that my heart is not in paranormal romance. So even as I was finally taking off, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this full time. So that's when I backed away and came back to writing epic fantasy.
Yeah, you got tired of the vampire romance. I understand. But
I have so much respect for those people who do it. It is brutally hard to succeed in that genre.
Why is it hard? Because there's so much competition.
But I think the appeal of paranormal romance is really strong chemistry, like genuine connections between the characters. So the people who are writing it, they excel at creating these really compelling relationships that force people to like tear through the book.
Like Twilight.
And it doesn't matter what genre you're, well, I haven't read that one, but whatever genre you're writing, you need to have that magic with your characters. And I actually learned a lot forcing myself to adapt to that genre, which I then brought into my future stuff. Awesome. But yeah, a lot of respect for people who can compel people to read book after book after book of those kind of relationships.
And I've already done it. I've taken us way off track. Andy, do you want to bring us back on track?
I was going to say, Philip's really like scaring me because I'm planning on writing a dark fantasy romance, which is a little bit, way out there. But
I'm excited for that one.
Oh, I know, me too. But now I'm like nervous because it's like they have, the book has to be around the connection between these two characters, and I don't know if I'm good at writing romance. So we're gonna find out just how good or bad I am.
Andy and I secretly love chick lit.
Yeah, well, I guess Andy, you got to decide if it's primarily a dark fantasy or first of romance, and that's where you're gonna have to end up putting the emphasis.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Thankfully, that's in 2 or 3 months that I'm going to start working on it. I've still got a few more months of
forever away. There you go.
Definitely. All right, so trying to get this back on track. Unless you had something else that you wanted to keep deviating us with, Stevie.
No more vampire sex. I swear.
Yes. Okay. So the word for the week, we're going to go with that one. The word for this week is reaver. Now, this word I first heard in the introductory poem to Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard. And it talks about Conan as a reaver. And the word reaver literally means a plundering forager. Think of a Viking, but more badass, more bloodthirsty, and And of course, it's in a fantasy context, so it's so much fun. And then, of course, there's always the Reavers from Firefly.
What about Mass Effect? I thought they were in Mass Effect too.
Ooh, which ones are the Reavers in Mass Effect?
I thought they were like the really bad guys. I'm looking it up now because when you said Reaver, I instantly thought, oh, are they the Reaper or the Reavers?
I think they're the Reapers.
Yeah, it's the Reapers. I'm sorry, but I instantly thought Mass Effect.
Yeah.
I like Reavers better. They should have used... Maybe they tried to steal it from Firefly.
Maybe.
Well, I've never seen Firefly, so...
The quote from Conan the Barbarian. Let me see if I can find it. It says, hither came Conan the Cimmerian, black-haired, sullen-eyed, sword in hand, a thief, a reaver, a slayer, with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth, to tread the jeweled thrones of the earth under his sandaled feet. Now, how could anyone have a more badass intro than that?
That's me every day. When I walk into a grocery store, yeah, or Starbucks, the cops are usually called.
With your gigantic melancholies.
Yeah, and my, what was it? My mirth, my what?
Gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirths, and his socked and sandaled feet.
I thought you were going to say with his gigantic melons. I really thought that. I'm like, Stevie, can you just be mature for one episode? Just for one. So we got to the word Reaver. I'm guessing we got to the word Reaver because we thought about Ravenous, Andy, because it was an R word. Is that what got you on that? Okay.
Well, no, I was posting an article the other day about the difference between sword and sorcery and epic fantasy, which, as it turns out, are two very significantly different genres. And it turns out I write more sword and sorcery than epic fantasy, or dark epic fantasy, however you want to call it. But of course, the classic example of sword and sorcery, the original, is Conan the Barbarian, and I have always loved that word. It always seemed like such a badass description for this guy at the beginning of every book, and so it was just like I had to use the word.
Whoa, we have Dylan Tyler's with us as well, and he says hello, so we must say hello to him. Are you waving?
Hello,
oh, hello, Dylan.
Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Dylan. That was funny.
It's always so weird. I don't know what to do.
I just have to make sure that, because you can't just wave, Andy. Now we're an actual podcast on Podbean. Oh, that's an announcement everyone needs to know. We are on iTunes and Podbean, and I'm going to be getting us on more apps as well, such as Overcast. So we have 3 episodes up, and I'm editing by the end of next week or the next weekend. I should have them all up. But yes, not to take us off track, but we are an official podcast now.
This is what I love about our Fantasy Fiends podcast, is I get to have all the fun of getting talking with the guests and stuff like that, and sort of being foolish, and then Stevie does all the behind the scenes work to make it successful. So
yeah. See,
it's such a great division of labor.
I am the Fantasy Fiends podcast. It's all me. So
I'm just the face.
You're just the handsome face. Let's see. So now we've introduced Philip.
Yeah.
And now we should.
Philip, why don't you? Well, I'm gonna take over, Stevie. I'm gonna kick you out, and I'm gonna do it.
Well, you have a really nice. Do you get a haircut?
I did.
It looks good. Looks good.
Thanks. Every 6 weeks I have to do it, or else it starts getting like really shaggy. So
you start looking like the hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. After the Chasm of the Lost, not before.
You'd probably sell more books if you weren't so tall, because you probably scare people away from your booth.
Yeah, there is that. But first, I attract them by being so tall that they can't help but see me. And then, of course, I'm super loud too, and I do big hand gestures with my massive arms.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm like one of those guys in the car dealerships.
Oh yeah, Bill. If you can't see us because you're listening to our podcast, Andy and I are flailing, and Philip is just watching us. And what were you gonna ask, Phil?
No, I was gonna say, Philip, why don't you tell us? Philip, why don't you tell us a little bit about your world? Do you write one world for your epic fantasy, or many of them?
there's one setting for the Chronicles of the Black Gate, and I've made it sort of diverse and large enough that I've had plenty of time to explore it over the course of the 5 books in the series.
And is
and it's
that
been
going to
fun
be?
because
No, go ahead.
that's going to be it. Yeah, once I finish book 5, I think I am done with that setting. Mostly because I've got too many new ideas I want to play with, and I don't know how people like Robert Jordan could spend 20 or 30 years playing in the same sandbox. But yeah, I'm eager to move on to different things, but it's been a lot of fun putting this one world together.
Now, let me ask you this. For my books, I'm sort of expanding my world one piece at a time with each new book in each series. Is that something you could do for your different series, or does it have to be like new world, new magic system, new all of that?
I'm going to go with something new because the nature of this setting, it's very defined, even though it's pretty large. It's held together by a very specific sort of magic. So only its own thing, it's got its own internal logic, and I don't think I could extrapolate that. I mean, I could set future stories in that world, but like I said, I'd rather just create something completely new out of whole cloth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, today we're going to talk about world building and how the real life history cultures in the past have influenced our worlds and how they influence fantasy worlds. Unfortunately, magic has never, or to my knowledge, has never existed in the modern world. So, I mean, in our world. So let's get that out of the way. What's your magic system like, Philip?
Well, let's see. It's tricky because a lot of it gets revealed throughout the series, and I'm going to discuss the books as if people haven't read them.
Perfect.
Good idea.
For
sure.
So what's pretty evident right out the bat, though, is that and the magic system are tied together because everything is connected by these massive teleportation portals. So the idea was originally to have instead of having like a contiguous geographic entity like one big Germany or one big Russia that's all like one blob, this is not geographically connected. Instead, you've got these huge cities that are connected by these massive teleportation portals. So it's as if the empire were, say, Sydney, Moscow, London, and Buenos Aires, right? And they each had a huge teleportation portal in the middle. So you could walk easily from one to the other through the portals, but you could never head out of the city and then see the other one because the distances are so vast.
Okay.
So these teleportation portals connect all the cities, but there are 2 that if anyone goes through them, they never come back, and no one is 100% sure what's on the other side. The White Gate, and one is known as the Black Gate. The White Gate is up in this flying stone island, and everyone believes that it leads you directly to heaven. And the Black Gate is underground, and everyone believes it takes you to hell. And the magic flows into the world through these 2 gates, as best as people can understand. So the religious and the magical aspects of this world are all intrinsically tied together, as the people do what humanity has always done, which is to try and explain weird shit as best as they can in terms of like their own personal beliefs and religions, and just make sense of it all. So that's why it would be really hard to create something else in this setting, because it's all tied in so tightly.
Okay.
In terms of the faith and so forth.
Interesting. So, like, would it be sort of like a universal force, sort of like, let's say, oxygen? The magic is something that people can tap into, or it's flowing through these things because it's in nature, or is it the elements, like just broad strokes?
Sure. So what I decided to do was, I sort of asked myself, like, how would people feel about having an open portal to hell? And probably people wouldn't be too comfy with that idea. So what this society did, what the religion did, is they found a way to close that gate. And it turned out, upon closing it, the magic that was coming in through that gate cut off, and all the magic users who had created these flying islands and teleportation portals and stuff suddenly lost their power. And sort of cap it off, the religious types decided that anyone who could cast magic was clearly connected to hell and should therefore be burnt at the stake.
Interesting.
Actually begins, there are no magic users. It's like the greatest sin. It'd be like the equivalent of being radioactive or being like a pedophile in our world. It's seen as just absolutely abhorrent. And if you are found to have the ability to cast magic, you're just kind of disappeared.
Interesting.
Obviously, the series kind of explores and goes beyond all that and digs in. And one of the heroes obviously realizes he has some capability in that area. But at the beginning of the books, no one is casting magic. Anyone who does is disappeared by like the equivalent of the church. And all the wonders and the miracles that were made before the Black Gate were closed, they're all slowly sort of being drained of their power and falling apart. So this is very much a world that is losing all of its wonder and magic and so forth as a result of this religious organization.
So it's like a purge of magic users from the church.
That's been going on for centuries.
Okay.
And as a result, nobody even knows what magic would look like. People don't know what you could even do with magic because literally there's all the written records have been purged, all the histories have been cleansed. Like that, nobody knows anymore. They just know that if you see someone doing some weird stuff, tell the authorities and they get removed, and that's it.
Wow.
So there's a lot of mystery at the beginning of the series, and it's something that I had a lot of fun exploring throughout the series. So I'll leave it at that in terms of the magic, just because that's a lot of the fun of the books is figuring out what's actually true, what the church has got right, what the church has got wrong, and so forth.
Oh, I like that. We'll get into the religion one in a minute, but Stevie, tell us about your world's magic.
So luckily I created magic that had to have it wasn't just unlimited, so Brandon Sanderson says, magic systems have to have a cost. Magic is mostly alchemical, and so the book is based off the world first. So I created the world and then I created the book afterwards. So and it was my first book, and it definitely, before I got to, like, I wrote it, left it alone for a year, came back to it, got really serious about self-publishing, and then tried to make it not look like my first book. So that was the first step, actually creating characters that mattered, and them having to learn or find truths, stuff like that. So anyway, the world was created by magic. It starts with a single continent, and through a dark energy in the ground, it creates 4 suns. Not to get into the science, but 4 suns that break up the continent into 4 pieces. Each sun is different, and each casts a different magic on each of these 4 territories. That's what the book is called, 4 territories. The red continent has no magical abilities. They do have it, but it's very, very minor. And they're upset with the other 3 territories for being able to manipulate sorcery better than they can. And they're a very hateful, kind of like a Viking organization. The green territory, most of them can use magic, and they're like elves. The purple territory is a territory of dead people who are kind of like revenants, and they can also use magic at a more powerful level, but don't care to use it. They're just very lazy. They can even see into the future, and they're actually like, why are you even asking me to look into your future? Who cares? And then the blue territory, they also use magic, but it's mostly to fish, hunt, and survive. So, but I made it really simple. If you use magic, you get very, very tired. It's all based on stamina. It's nothing original. What isn't original, in my opinion, was the 4 suns that created the same sort of sorcery. I call it sorcery. I don't really call it magic. But not everyone can manipulate it the same amount and stuff like that. And in the book 1, it's not fully explained, and I don't really have 100% grasp over it. So it's going to be more exciting when I create the prequel to the 4 territories, and when I create my 3rd book called the 5th territory, and I want to expand on it. but there's enough magic in it that answers questions. And I don't even know what I would base. I would probably base the magic off of World of Warcraft. When you use your magic, it reduces your mana.
Right.
Except if you use a lot of sorcery, you usually have to take a nap or go to sleep to, rely. It's like taking a big workout. But it's better in the book, I promise. So I feel like I can never explain it fully, but it's so, in my opinion, I am the author, but if you read it, I get sucked up into it, and I get, I really like it. It's something I wish I had. So,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, my magic system is actually not magic. It's based on I think it's Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke that said, magic technology is indistinguishable from magic. Advanced technology. So basically, all of the magic in the world comes from this ancient race of people who are dead and gone, and they've created all these things that are based on the principles of magnetism or sound vibrations or genetics, things like that. In one case, there's even like solar cells that appear to be magic because the people, the medieval era people don't understand them. But from the author's perspective, I know exactly how they work because I've created them based off scientific principles. So there really is no magic. It's just science in a unique application, let's say.
So would you say you write science fiction?
No, I write fantasy.
With the science fiction under the covers of magic.
Yeah, it's sort of that thing. Like I'm putting out a series of stories on disorders and how people treat some of these disorders as one of them is a magical rite that causes Alzheimer's disease, or another one is autism and sensory processing disorder that's perceived as a gift from the gods. Like different. It's basically using a little bit of the magical side of things, but through the concept of sound science.
Now, I read the first one. Is there like a small amount of this in the first one and it's just explained more in the other ones?
Well, you don't actually get a lot of explanations until the last books, or there may not even be full explanations throughout. It's just something that I know. For example, in the first book, when the hunter is tied to that obelisk and there's the portal opened into hell.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
There's a very specific reason that obelisk responds. Now, the portal into hell is a sort of a magical thing because, there really is no way to open a portal into other dimensions given current technology, but in the future there could be blah blah blah. But the portal into hell is activated a very specific way, just like the cleansing ritual that he goes through with the priest is also activated for a very specific reason, and it has nothing to do with the way that with the words that they said. And I'm not going to spoil it because that's a reveal in the later books 6 or something. But
well, I do a lot of research on self-publishing. I actually listen to, I probably read about 1 or 2 books on book marketing every week. And I actually, when I was rewriting the 4 territories, I took certain stuff out so I could make them book magnets later. So I'm going to say, hey, do you want to know why the black energy, how it actually created the 4 territories? Well, you have to download the short story. Give me your damn email address. So, I actually kept that in mind when I rewrote the book, and you're actually kind of reminding me of that when you say, how did the obelisk know to respond? What was the stimulus? Maybe you could even write that into a short story and force me to have to give you my email address. I don't know, just my idea. I like to say I'm business 75%, writing 2%.
Right. Well, we've spent a lot of time on the magic, so let's get into the other side of things. Philip, what's the currency, the economy of your world? What's that like?
It's based, since we're referencing real world stuff, it's based off 11th century Japan. Okay. They had this incredible society, sort of pre-samurai, pre-shogun, what most people think of when they think Japan's history. It's called the Heian era. And it was this incredible time. It's when the first book, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name of it, The Shining Prince was written, the first book I think ever written, a work of fiction. And it's a society where you had one capital, which became today Kyoto. And it was this like cradle of refinement and arts and so forth. And the rest of Japan was sort of funneling to the nobility and the emperor. Um, and they didn't really have a currency. I'm not a historian. I could get slammed for a lot of these assertions I'm about to make. But what was really a measure of wealth was like bundles of rice. And that would measure, like, you could almost gauge someone's power and wealth by how many bundles of rice their properties gave them. So, in my, I was really inspired by this, and I basically modeled the floating island, which has that gate to heaven that I mentioned before, off of this sort of proto-Kyoto from the Heian era, where it's this incredibly advanced civilization that basically focuses all of its energy and admiration on poetry and distilling perfumes and, fashion. That was the arena in which people fought and proved themselves, and like how cultured you were. And all of their wealth from the rest of my fantasy world is basically funneled up to support this kind of decadent society. And so there isn't really much by the way of currency. Most of it works in terms of bartering. But because of how stratified society is, everybody's just given their food, given their, what they need, or based on their station, what they deserve. And all of the wealth just kind of like flows up to this one city in the sky that benefits from everybody's work.
Interesting. Stevie, what about you? What's the currency of your world?
Well, mine isn't really explained because as we know from past podcasts, my book is definitely a character who goes from rags to still in rags, but has martial arts now. And yeah, so it's basically I did not allow myself to use, for some reason, the 4 territories, there are words I will not allow myself to use. You will not find the word boy, girl, man, woman, husband, wife. I have no idea why I did that, but they're not in there. Dollars and money are those words. So I use the word currency. And it's not a big deal in my book because he's poor as hell. He gets all his food from hunting. He gets all his water from stealing because they have to use water canisters. The water will evaporate under the red sun. So there is a trade going on between the blue and the red. So he has to steal all his water canisters from the rich who definitely can buy more. But it's basically just described as currency. And that's what Brandon Sanderson said. There's no way to, I treat Brandon Sanderson like a god. There's no way to add every single aspect of lore into your world. So currency was one of the ones that I didn't use a lot. And I think that's, but it's something I definitely could go on further. And if I did, each territory would definitely have their own system of currency. Like right off the top of my head, the green would probably use like special leaves encoded in wax or something. But then how you could easily counterfeit that, So I'd have to give it more thought. But he's a poor bastard, and he just steals everything. So. And what about you, Andy?
I mean, it sounds like you could almost have a water-driven economy in that city where I've read it, before in both science fiction and fantasy, where a desert society's water is life.
Like the Dune.
So everything revolves around one ration of water or 2 rations of water or a day's supply of water. People
That's a really good
water.
idea.
The rich have more water. They've got enough water to bathe in. I was actually I can't remember the name of the series, but it was a whole series based around people who have the ability to move water and their water-driven society. I don't remember. It was one of these big 5 authors series, but it was.
Wait,
it was
now you're bothering me. I feel like I know that book. I feel like my brother.
I don't know if it's Stormlord or something like that, or Stormbringer.
I can't think of it. In either way though, I'm gonna steal that idea now. So yeah. I really like that idea because water canisters are a big reason why the poor don't live very long. They usually just die from not having enough water or heat strokes. Even though they're very accustomed to the heat, they die of it. So
yeah. Have you guys played Dark Sun, that Dungeons and Dragons setting?
No, I just got into D&D.
So Dark Sun is no longer continued. It's this desert world where exactly water is life. And I won't go into it now, but you should definitely there's a ton of material online. You can just Google Dark Sun and how they
Yeah.
handle water and life and vegetation and stuff is just really awesome.
I may
It's one
have
of my
played
favorite
a
settings, so
campaign.
check it out.
I may have played a campaign in that setting because I have a DM I go to a lot, and we just did a desert setting. But I'm such a noob at it. I probably heard Dark Sun and just another D&D term. There's too many to know.
Well, Google it.
Dark
Check
Sun.
it out. I think you get a lot of inspiration from it.
I might have to do that because it's really depressing. It reminds me of the opposite of Waterworld. Just everyone is just super rude and all about themselves, selfish, and it's all about survival in this world that I've created.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the biggest aspect in my book, world building wise. Y'all go on. I'm going to think about it.
All right.
So.
Yeah. My economic currency is the imperial. It's sort of the $1, but it's a gold coin. And there's the silver drake, which is like a half imperial, and then the half drake, and then the copper bits. It's basically based on the British monetary system when it was all coins: the shilling, the farthing, the threepence. And like definitely not as complicated, but it's based on that with the
Thank goodness.
yeah, that particular economic system is crazy. All right, moving on to religions. Religion is one of the things that I had the most fun with in my book. I created 13 different gods. It's a polytheistic society, and I made that based off of sort of the Greek or Roman, the Norse, Egyptian. Each of these civilizations had a god for a specific purpose. There was Ares, the god of war, or there was Odin, the god of wisdom, or that each of these gods had a purpose. So that's how I approached the creation of my world. I basically created a god for each of the main purposes or main driving forces behind humanity. There's the god of war, there's the god of heroism, there's the god of virtue, there's the god of wisdom, there's the god of vengeance, and a lot of it is just base instincts. And then of course I had some fun with it by creating the god of sickness and bad music, or things like just sort of kind of going a bit off the rails and having fun with it. But it's basically it was actually something that I mentioned in the first book in my series, is that gods are created according to the needs of humans. And so this is a very cynical, not very religious world that I've created, where these gods have been shaped according to what people need of them. The warriors need a god of war, so they've created this deity who they worship, who they call on in time of need. Or they need the merchants. They have a god specifically for success or coin or business endeavors, and so they call on them. And it's sort of a much more cynical sort of society. But then each of the religious orders has their own purpose. One of them, for example, the beggar priests, they care for the needy. They take in orphans.
That was my favorite one.
The secret keepers, which I explore in Thief of the Night Guild to great effect, are basically alchemists, but they are scientists. They delve into all the secrets of the world, but then they keep them. And they kill anybody who tries to steal them. So it's a really fun dynamic to play with. And each of these religions was just sort of created off the cuff. But then as I develop the world more, I can use them. For example, in the Thief of the Night Guild, my book is a bank robbery. And who is the bank owners? One of the priestly orders. So she goes and she breaks into a temple, which is actually a bank. And so like it's I found that these orders can sort of be shaped according to the needs of my stories, but because there's 13 of them and they have so much to do with them. Philip, you were saying that your religious orders have sort of suppressed magic. Is it very like Catholic Church Inquisition style religious system, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's kind of when I was putting this entire system together, what I wanted to do was create something that felt very organic to the physical setting. So, just like how Sanderson has the world of Roshar with its high storms, and if you establish like those basic, physical truths, you then work out how society would respond to that, these thought experiments, and then you just go logically saying, well, if this, then that, and then if that, then this, and so forth, and you eventually get to. I did the same with society where you have these teleportation portals and they're trying to explain them. And since it's a magic they no longer have or understand, it all sort of got swept into this religious system that has decided. There's 7 of these sort of city states that are connected by these teleportation portals. And what the religious people decided was that it's sort of a reincarnation system where if you live a righteous life according to what your station should be, your caste, based on what city you were born in, you'll be reborn the next city up. And eventually, if you are able to live a righteous life all the way through, your soul will pass through the white gate, and you will, join Brahmin or the equivalent in this world.
And this
where
is
you no
true.
longer in that cycle.
Or
This is what they believe.
Okay, this is what they believe. Okay.
This is what they believe. This is the accepted religion of the land. And I was very careful as like the narrative authority to not condone it or disprove it straight away. A lot of it is exploring whether or not they're right. So, you have the underground city where the Black Gate, the closed Black Gate, is located, and they are the lowest of the low. They are barely seen as better than animals. They're slaves who work in the mines. And they are told that their life of toil and misery is meant to refine their soul. And if they live a good life as a slave, they will be reborn in the next life, and so forth and so on, until you're living in this flying stone cloud. That's what I call these islands in the sky. And you are given greater spiritual authority and financial wealth as you move up this chain. If you believe in what they say, the end result is that you basically have a very strong caste system where, depending on where you're born, you're right. But this one is geographically based and not necessarily. I don't know that much about the Indian system, but I think it's depending which family you're born into.
Well,
so,
I mean, don't quote me on this, but I believe had a lot to do with it in the beginning. I know in the early days of the ancient Indian Empire, there were different,
right.
I wouldn't say races, but there were different like kingdoms. There were the Rajputs, there were the Maharaja, so I don't remember exactly the names, but so they were all part of this Indian Empire, and I believe like the Rajputs were the nobility or royalty, and so they were the families who were descended from them became the higher class and caste or however you say it, and then the ones who were from the other societies took a lower place, and I know family does play a role in it, but I think that's more reductive when you look at it as a society. I think it's almost more. It started out with professions, didn't it? Like the warrior caste was higher, and then the merchant caste was lower, and then there was the servant caste.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right. I purposefully didn't read too much into the actual Indian belief system because I was worried about becoming unduly influenced by it. I wanted to take like the broad strokes and then figure out my own system based on the setup that I had. Sounds exactly right, and it sort of works that way in the world where if you're born higher up, because each city has its own purpose in how each station in life has its own purpose in helping you cleanse your soul and move on to the next. So one of the cities is the warriors, and their purpose is to defend the empire. And if you live the life of a good warrior and you do defend the empire, you transcend that need and you're grown and you appear in the next one, which is the city of the scholars and so forth.
So quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in your books, do you actually start answering the question whether or not the religion is true or not? Do you start giving it away?
As the series, well, what ends up happening through the series is that accepted truths start to get challenged by people's experiences and what the adventures that they're going through and what they're actually seeing with their own eyes. And then it becomes much like religion. If you look at the history of the Catholic Church since the days of Jesus to today, it's actually changed, refined its message. The Council of Nicaea, where they established the Nicene Creed, and they go formalizing and adapting to all these influences. That's what kind of starts happening through the series, where the religion starts to get challenged
Wow.
And but I've been very careful. I really want that to be part of the fun of the series, where the reader isn't sure whether or not this oppression is justified. A lot of these fantasy books, you have the dark one, and anyone who serves him is evil, and you can kill them, and that's cool because they're evil, and there's no one debating it, right? But what I wanted to do was I wanted it to be much more subjective in my world, where like everyone has their beliefs, and some people do believe that it's okay to enslave an entire population and make them live very short, horrific lives because it's for their own good, and they're going to be reborn as better people.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you disagree with that point of view? How do you justify it when the religion you were raised in tells you one thing, and now you want to try and prove that it's not right? So I didn't come down as the author and say this is 100% true.
Yeah,
everyone's justified in behaving this way. I really want people to be questioning the characters and be like, wrong, And one of the challenges is that we all bring our 21st century sensibilities to it, right? Like anti-slavery, like equality of the sexes, all this stuff that we live and breathe today. Most of us live and breathe today. Doesn't necessarily translate into medieval or fantasy settings. So I have my religion have a lot of biases that we as people won't agree with. But I wanted to challenge the readers to be like, well, what if it makes sense within that society, and that's what the religion, states? Does that make the character a bad person for being part of a society that believes that? So I had a lot of fun playing with that subjective truth and making the reader try and guess as the characters discover whole bunches of new stuff and try and figure out whether or not it's correct or not. That's a large part of tension in the series.
And maybe we'll see some of that in the excerpt you sent us, which we're still doing, right, Andy?
No.
Absolutely. No. Absolutely.
I thought
you won't,
I thought you were saying no.
I picked the first chapter.
Oh.
I picked the first chapter of book 1, so we won't be getting into that.
That's all right. But that is we're running out of time, right, Andy?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
But it's okay. We can go a little bit later.
Okay.
Also, I'm totally fine with skipping the reading because this conversation, I think, is a lot more interesting. So I am fine if we do run out of time. I'd rather continue digging into the world building and stuff that we're on a roll. So don't feel like we have to end a good conversation just to jump into the reading on my part.
Reading is actually my favorite part of the whole thing.
And we don't like to make Andy mad, but I think we're starting at a further in.
Yeah, we'll start a little bit later, but we've still got a few more minutes to keep talking about
good.
The technology and science level. Stevie, what's your technology and science in the Red Kingdom where the story begins? What's the technology like?
So now we're going back to magic. So there is no real science and there is no real technology. This is basically a very new world. All the territories have not come to an agreement with each other. Nobody really knows the history of the world. Everybody is a mutation of their own son. Usually their grandfathers died off because the mutation didn't take very well. So nobody really knows the history because, in the beginning eras, our history was spoken through stories. And so it's fairly new. So they do find out that they're able to control sorcery and they're able to push this sorcery onto objects. So you find out beginning very early in the 4 territories that the red territory, which is called Rhea, R-E-A-H, Rhea, the Rhaelic soldiers found a way that they could cross over to the green territory without dying of because once they get to the green territory, even though it's like 70 degrees, they'll start freezing to death. So they found out that if they equip themselves with this armor, and it's usually a volcanic metal that they use, like granite or a volcanic rock, and they somehow morph it to their bodies, and then they have the minority, which is people who can manipulate sorcery, to shove heating magic into these sets of armor. And these sets of armor are freaking awesome. Like in my head and the way I describe them, they're awesome. and so they heat up, and that is the way they're able to cross over into these other territories to raid and destroy. That's the only mission, to steal, raid, and destroy. But that's really as far as I got technologically. But I guess
talking like basic medieval era metallurgy and blacksmithing practices and medicine. Like, what are we talking about? Like the actual technology of the world.
I think so. You would say like blacksmithing as a technology.
Well, like what degree of blacksmithing? As an example of mine. My technology and science level is on par with 12th to 15th century Europe. There's basic medicine, definitely not to the advanced degree of traditional Chinese medicine or Japanese medicine. You know, leaking, bleeding, those sort of things. There are some like hedge doctors, people who have studied herbalists, things like that, using natural remedies to heal. And of course, many of them do very effectively. But then the physicers, which is sort of the name for the doctors there, they're just the worst. And then there's a priestly order that actually has knowledge that they say is divine knowledge passed on from their goddess to heal people. But it's basically, you know, you'll find out where they come from later. And so that's the most advanced medical thing in the world, but they're very expensive. So people, they usually go to, you know, to the corner herbalist or the naturopath or the alchemist or the, what's the word from Romeo and Juliet? Where do they go at the end to get the poison? What's the name of the guy?
Are we talking about the people with the big noses?
No, those are plague doctors.
I don't know.
Plague doctors, that's right.
Yeah, no, you know, they always have the picture of the big skull sitting on the desk. I can't remember the name. I'll Google it when one of you guys are talking. But so that's where the science and medicine is at. Then of course there's basic blacksmithing, sort of on par with 15th, 14th century Europe. You know, there's Damascus steel swords. There is plate armor, but more commonly used as chainmail armor. There is woodworking, stoneworking, basic steel working. One city has advanced steel technology close to on par with early 20th century industrial steel production, but maybe more late 19th century. And at the same time, there is much more advanced geography and record keeping, tax documents, deeds, all of that, code of laws that many cities in Europe didn't have at that time.
There are some stuff. So I guess I'll give away something that I wasn't going to say, but there is an engine that is built on the back of these pieces of armor that my protagonist Esh doesn't see until very late in the book. It's super awesome. And magic is placed in this engine and it just keeps running and running. So for a very, very long time, it's a big deal. And his mentor is the one that shows it to him. Also, things that are in the book that the readers may not think about, but there is a way that they are compressing this water into cans. And it is also the people in the red territory who are the minor amount of people that know sorcery, and they're usually the richest, and they're the ones that figure out a way to compress the water. I myself haven't really figured it out because Esh is an orphan, and I show the entire world only through Esh, and he only sees the rich part of the city one time, and it ends up with him running for his life. So he doesn't see a whole lot. He actually sees more of the technology used in the other 3 territories, which I can't even talk about without giving away huge parts of the book. But he does come across. I'm sorry. I would be mad if I was reading the 4 territories and I gave away the technology that's used in the blue territory, which I thought was ingenious. But you know, I am a genius, so.
Very good. Philip, what about you? What's technology and science like in your world?
That's one of the areas I didn't go too in depth. It changes a little bit from city-state to city-state, but the vast majority of it is basically sort of medieval, where it's going to be very familiar to people who watch Game of Thrones.
Okay.
I would have to agree with Phil on this. I was kind of the same, and I made a few because I am a new author, and that's what I bring to this podcast. You know, I'm not afraid to admit it, but I'm a pantser as well. And if you're listening to this and you don't know what that is, I write off the seat of. I say it wrong every single time. I write. Phil, how do you say it?
Right by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, I write by the seat of my pants. So, and I'm just now taking Andy's advice, and I'm actually plotting a little bit more. So, and it's become it's been very, very helpful lately. But I didn't really even think about technology as a lore. It just kind of popped up, and whenever a scene would come up, I'd blame it on alchemy or sorcery, and that's something I believe a lot of fantasy authors do. They'll blame it on something like that so they don't have to get into the science. And Andy, you and I've talked about this. And
yeah, a lot. In Thief of the Night Guild, it's actually a really common thing that there's advanced steel, advanced locks, advanced chemicals. Like there's acids that are as potent as acids that are being discovered and created today, and it's all just under the heading of alchemy, because alchemy is such a mystical science that you can get away with a lot of things, and people will be like, "Yeah, it's alchemy."
Yep. I like that because I don't have to be a chemist or a nuclear engineer to write my book.
Oh, but you still got to do some research. Like I used modern acids, gave them medieval fantasy names, but I still had to know exactly what they did so that I could make it realistic.
Right.
Well,
consistency is key.
Exactly.
That's one of the mistakes I made as a first-time author, and that was trying to become unique. And I've read recently, it's impossible to be unique anymore because every idea has already been taken. So don't be afraid to, I would even go as far to say, steal from other books and make it your own and bring it in your own style. I wish I would have done that writing the Four Territories, but I didn't. So like now I wish I would have used the word man and woman because it's very clunky now. Like reading it now a year later, I get stopped when I have to read male and female every single time. So yeah, I mean, just first time author mistakes.
Philip, your government, is it you said it's sort of in a pyramid. Is it a king at the top, an emperor? You said empire, so it's an emperor, right?
It's the equivalent of a pope. It's he's called the ascendant. The religion is called ascendancy because you're basically ascending through all the different cycles of life. And he is but it's almost more like the Japanese emperor, where he's almost more of a figurehead at the beginning of the book.
Okay.
He is secluded and revered, but he's not really in the actual workings of the government, which are all spread out from around him. And there's a big show about consulting him and so forth. But in the end of the day, it's his ministers and all his folks like that who are pulling the levers. But it's a pretty inefficient government. One of the situations that's going on is that it's the people at the top are having trouble controlling all the different people below them. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of inefficiency with resources not being funneled properly up to the top. So I'm definitely not pulling back from pointing out the drawbacks of a centralized, very small government who's incredibly self-satisfied with being the most spiritually elite people in the world and don't see much reason to put much effort into controlling the rest of their empire.
So it's sort of like a mix between the Japanese emperors and the Pope, the papacy, or like when the popes became militant,
right?
When they were going on, on the warpath or on the Crusades, they would take military power, but then with sort of the isolation and the isolation of the of the Japanese, the modern Japanese emperors, not so much the old, because in the 16th, 17th century, the Japanese emperors had a lot of power, whereas now the Japanese emperor is much more of a figurehead.
Right, and I guess I'm still thinking more like 11th century, but you're right. When you get into like the shogunate era, there's that struggle going back and forth. And there's one figure who's called the Ascendant's Grace, manifestation of his benevolence, who leads his armies. It's sort of like his number one general who ranges around, imposing his will, not necessarily consulting with him on what his will is, but telling people what they should and should not do. So there's a wide array of ministers and so forth, and people who all execute the government and make it happen. But there is still it's not completely dysfunctional, but there is a lot of dysfunction, which again is one of those cracks in the religious system itself. Because if this was a completely perfect religious system, then why is the temporal manifestation of it so flawed? But there's all these arguments that go back and forth about it.
I gotta ask you, Phil. Your religion reminds me so much of Catholicism, because I am Catholic, and I don't know, for some reason I'm getting well, my question is, do people in your book have to pay? Can they pay? Are they able to pay for their penance?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
That's a really great twist on it. But that would just undercut it way too violently.
Okay.
But
so,
I know what you're talking about. I think that's one of the crazier things about Catholicism in history, where you could get out of a lot of. Actually, I also love in Catholicism back in the day. There was a time when you could buy real estate in heaven.
Oh God!
I don't know if you ever heard about this.
No, I hope you're kidding.
Yeah, you could actually go ahead and make sure you have your estates lined up in heaven by paying tons of cash to the church.
Where can I go for this?
I think Rome. No, not anymore.
I thought you were gonna give me your PayPal address.
If you want me to secure you some condos, we could talk after the call.
Maybe a place on the moon.
We could get in touch with NASA.
What about your government system for the red territory specifically?
Because
each one.
Yes, and I spend most of the time in the red territory. Well, the blue and red territory have the exact same. You would call it a monarchy, right? With the king, and then the royal guards, and then the guards. Well, there's the king, and then there's the guards, and they function much like knights. So they have a lot of power. I won't even say like the knights who didn't really do anything. They basically just held a title and got a lot of land, and then they could have slaves, right? Am I right about that? The knights had slaves on plantations.
Landowning knights could have, whatever they needed to farm the land and stuff.
It's basically indentured servitude, where they're called serfs, or if they were actually unfree to leave the land, they were called villeins, which is where the word villain comes from.
That's awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah, so it gets pretty complex, like the different levels of like feudalism and so forth. But
I definitely don't go that far. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say there's the king, and then there's the royal guard, and then there's just the knights, and they get paid pretty well, paid enough to live. Esh, my protagonist, grows up. He doesn't even know there is a government until he's level. Oh my God. I've been writing that lit RPG for that's all I think about right now is my lit RPG. Until he gets to the age of 9, he realizes that at the age of 14, much like the giver, he is going to be given a profession. And so he starts working out really hard trying to become a soldier because he wants to live, and he's tired of being hated because he's a hybrid. He's half green and half red, and he is absolutely hated. It's no secret that he gets mortally wounded at 8 years old, and he gets stronger and smarter than all the other boys, but he doesn't get chosen to be a soldier, and that's what I'm going to have to make my readers find out. He is not chosen as a soldier when he should have been. He was the best choice for a soldier, and the only reason... So the lie my character tells himself, the lie Esh tells himself, is that the only thing that matters is to be accepted by other people. That is the lie he tells himself. And the whole story is about him finding the truth that it's not others he needs to worry about, it's himself. That, he needs to love himself and become a badass fighter. So that's it. Yeah. So awesome. He finds out about the government at level because he's poor, and the government doesn't give a shit about the poor people. In fact, they just let him die. So, Andy, what about you?
Mine is more of a monarchy as well, but instead of it being like yours where there's knights and stuff, it's more the nobility has all the powers. And the way I've written it is all the guards are basically just, you know, there's the royal guards who guard the palace, and they're sort of the elitists of the guard class, the warrior class, but there's not, you know, it's like they're like the upper middle class because they get paid better and they have fancier uniforms, but they're just guards just the same. And it's the king and then his advisors and the dukes and the nobles, and there's usually a council and stuff. There's one kingdom that I explore in the third book of the Last Few Solari series that is it's 12 kingdoms, the name of the land, but 5 of the kingdoms have been wiped out. So there's just 7 kingdoms left in the 12 kingdoms. It's kind of a fun little twist there. But they're each controlled. They're more of a caliphate, sort of more an Arabian structure, but with a monarchy as well. But it's a different sort of thing.
I just to change the subject real quick. I wanted to say your monetary system, your currency. I noticed it when reading your book, and I just have to say it. Like I was a big fan of it, and it actually stuck in my head. And that's usually stuff that doesn't stick in my head, but I actually liked it, and it's used a good fair amount because it explains the hunter's pad and all the cool stuff he has, but he doesn't give a shit about it. Or no, he likes it. He likes it, right? He likes it, and that to me was against the. I wasn't expecting the hunter to actually care about living in a nice place.
Well, I did explore the monetary system a little bit because the hunter gets paid for his kills, so he can't get paid 20,000 monies. You know, because his profession revolves around money. I had to develop that enough, and so you know the Imperial. There's no empire, but I just chose Imperial as the name because I liked it and it stuck. And then of course, getting into the thief stories, it becomes even more important because everything she does is measured in how much she can steal. At one point, she actually says, "Okay, how much is it going to cost me to buy my freedom?" And they say they have to give her monetary value, and they have to ascribe monetary value to everything she steals. So one gem necklace that she steals is worth 300 Imperials, and you can't have 300 monies. You have to give so it did involve a bit more specificity than
And I want to add something to that. I just want to say, and I'm the exact opposite. Esh has no need for money. He's poor as hell, and he stays poor. And now I have a question for Phil. Phil, I'm a little bit confused. Is there the same protagonist throughout all your books?
Yeah. So the Chronicles, there are 6 point of view characters.
Okay.
And we follow all of their adventures through the series.
Okay, and each one has their own book, or they're in each book?
Each book features all 6 of them, and most of them are actually together as a group. One of them is sort of way out there, like Daenerys Targaryen is in Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah.
So the benefit of having lots of point of views is that when you have a complex society, you can have people coming from different stations in it, and each of them can show you their experience of this world from radically different parts of it. So it's a really organic way to show your world building just by their assumptions and their cultural mores and so forth without having to info dump. So that was a really great way just to bring all that complexity to the page without having to just sort of throw it in people's faces through one person's point of view.
Interesting.
Man, this has been such an awesome discussion. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Last one, language and culture. So
I love this one.
Just give us a 20-word summary of the languages and cultures.
You make the best 120 words.
Well, you took all of our time with magic, so what do we do?
I'm a language major, though. This is what okay, fine. Phil, you go first while I think of my 20 words.
Okay. Well, they've got one common culture through the cities because they are able to basically walk. It's like New York City with its boroughs. Like you can go from Brooklyn to whatever, you just walk there or take the train. So even though they are so geographically different and distant, they all share the same language. Culturally, each city has its own very distinct one because of the religious connotations to it. So one is basically like towers emerging from the middle of the ocean. And they have a very, as you would imagine, almost like islander feel to them. Another is underground. Another is up in the clouds. So I created what I hoped was cultures that felt true to what it'd be like to live in those very different settings, but with still having that interplay of being able to share and influence each other through the portals. So you might be drinking wine from one of the other city states. Well, so the trade, there's a lot of that influencing each other. So that was a lot of fun to put up, distinct cultures and then figuring out how that proximity would lead them to dramatically influence each other at the same time.
Now, when you think of the language that these people would speak, would it be English or would it be Japanese? What would be the closest, like in your head, what sort of culture are these people?
Well, the warrior case is based on like ancient Germany.
Okay.
The guys up top is ancient Japan. There's the islander kind of Samoan feel to the ones who are the towers rising straight out of the water.
You
got like a Nepalese
Japanese-esque people, do they speak with that Japanese sentence structure, the very formal, very polite?
They have a much more formal and they, since they revere poetry, they tend to really annoyingly try and be poetic when a lot of them still don't actually have the talent for it. So that gets peppered into a lot of when you're talking with them. But those are subtle variations, and you don't see it too much in the first books because all of it's taking place in that warrior city-state, which is a lot more confrontational and harsh. But so I guess the language, even though they speak the same kind of like common, the language reflects their cultural station in terms of like how direct you are, how much metaphor you use, how the slaves, their language is a lot more servile and so forth. It's almost more like accents than distinct languages.
Very cool. Stevie, what about you?
Okay, real quick.
20 words.
20. Okay, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more.
It's sort of capture those 20 words.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's like the Tower of Babylon. You know that story where God dispersed everybody? That's kind of how it was. But, it did start from one territory, so they do speak a common language. And but each territory sorry, somebody's knocking on the door. Each territory has their own language, and Esh, in his own time, actually starts studying Vivrianish, which is the Green Territory's language, and it actually comes from vivre, which is the French word to live. And I'm going to give something away here. The Green Territory was the first territory, so that's why I called them Vivrianish. I don't know. It's cool in my head because I love the French language.
That's awesome.
So, thank you. And I think I'm going to stop it there, but the book did start with me actually trying to create a language for it, much like Tolkien, but I gave up after 20 words. So I'm going to be honest. It sucks. It's hard.
Yeah, definitely.
And what about you, Andy?
The language of my world it's Ainari, which is Ainan is the continent in the world. People are very self-centered. And it's basically English, British English, with the Cockney and the Scottish brogue and the Irish slang and all of that. The higher ups, they speak the more flowery court English, which actually was French. The people who, the ruling class of England for many years was French descent. So French was a much more poetic language. So the English that was spoken in court was much more poetic and much more formal by comparison to the common English. Then there's parts of the world up northeast that speaks a very Arabic language, or it's actually derived from Arabic, Turkish, Pashto. Like I basically looked in Google Translate for these cultures that have very Arabian, Arabesque derivatives and use those words. So there's sort of a mixture of those flavors up there. And the cultures are very much like cultures of the South are more European, France, London, and then Prague. The city of Prague was sort of an architectural marvel for its time, and that's one of the cities that he goes to in the second book. And then across the sea, instead of going north across the sea, they go south across the sea to find the Viking-esque people, the Norse type characters, which I'll get into in later stories.
And the hunter Speak all these languages?
No, he doesn't speak any languages. He's actually very uncultured because he only has 50 years of memory, and he's been killing people the whole time. So he blends into high society. He's learned what he needs to know to blend into high society, but he doesn't really have a lot of culture. So it's actually fun because I get to explore the world through him. The things that he finds so amazing are the things that I find amazing as I write this world of this new city that he goes to, or this exotic culture that he finds. So it's really fun for me to explore it that way.
Awesome.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. Anyways, that is time for us. Yeah, that's it. We're only 11 minutes over.
I knew this was going to be a deep one.
Yeah. I thought it wasn't going to be as drawn out because I've got maybe 100 words of notes describing each of my things. So
that's how we
world building, man. It's a hole that you can always go deeper and deeper into.
Oh yeah,
that's very true. Very true. So that is it for today. Please be sure to check out Philip Tucker. Is that 1 L and 1 P or 2 of anything?
The board.
How can we?
One across the board.
Just one, like Phil, Philip.
Perfect. Philip Tucker, check him out on Amazon. And are you on the other iBooks and Kobo and all of that, or are you Amazon exclusive?
Amazon exclusive.
Perfect. And your website?
Don't bother. It's not worth looking at.
Okay.
Just either find me, just find me on Twitter or PW Tucker, or just go to my Amazon author page and you'll see all my stuff right there.
Perfect. Under no circumstances look for Philip Tucker's website.
Never. All vampire sex.
Yeah.
It's just pictures. I photoshopped a bunch. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Vampire sex. Perfect.
Want me to go ahead and end it here?
Yeah, well, next week we've got Brandon Barr. We're going to be doing a pretty interesting discussion on religion. I'm not exactly sure what aspect of it we're going to be covering, but it's going to be different from the last discussion we had on religion is fantasy, anti-religious, but we're going to get into the religious side of things because evidently religion plays a very important role in his life, not only as an author, but also as a human being. So it's going to be interesting to delve into
I'm interested for that one.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much, guys, for listening in on this podcast. That is episode 8 with Phil Tucker. If you don't go buy his books, then I will be super upset with you, and you're not even going to be allowed to read any of Andy's books or my books. So that's a lie. Go buy my books. Don't even worry about the other two. Actually, I don't even have a book out right now. They're still getting edited. So anyways, guys, thanks a lot. Thanks from the Gnome. Say goodbye to the Giant. And Phil, how tall are you?
I am 6 feet tall.
Damn it.
He could be a human. He's a human.
Yeah, he's a regular human, and I'm just a gnome. Or apparently a sprite, because I did a very good sprite voice last week.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a shame we didn't get to do any of the voices in Phil's.
I know.
We'll have to get you on another time. When's your next book coming out, Phil?
This month, book 5, wrapping up the series.
Oh, nice.
Oh, sweet. Okay, well, we're booked pretty much until November, so we'll have to get you on in December.
That'd be awesome.
Perfect. Hit me up.
Awesome.
All right, Phil. Thanks a lot, and thank you for tuning in on this week's episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you later, Phil.